Are you with me, Guy?
Yes.
All right. For those of you who don't know, Mr. Gary Demar, he is the founder of American Vision, and also his website is garydemar.com. Author of several books, including Last Days Madness, God and Government, War of the Worldviews. The most recent one I believe you've done is Wars and Rumors of Wars. How many books have you written, Gary? About 300?
It seems that way. My wife will tell you it seems like I've written 300 because I'm always down here doing that. And I've written 35. Actually, the latest one is the Rapture and the Fig Tree Generation.
Right. All right. So as I say, anyone, if you want to hear some impressive Christian apologetics and worldview stuff, you can go to americanvision.org and garydemar.com, and you can presumably you can order your books from that website as well, Gary.
Yes, and for international people, we do have a lot of electronic versions of books, as I know postage is pretty expensive to ship it out of the United States, and who knows what the post office will do regarding this coronavirus. Will they even ship packages from the United States without quarantining them for 14 days?
Yeah, well, I mean, these are unprecedented times. They feel like they're very bizarre times. I'm not even sure how to process it myself. I guess on shows like this, we've always talked about the possibility of, this type of thing happening without really thinking it's gonna happen, I suppose. I mean, there's a lot of preppers out there who are going to be feeling very proud of themselves right now, but I'm not really sure what to make of it all. I mean, my own view is that I think perspective has been lost. I think there's a huge amount of fear being pumped out by the media. People are scared. I think it's also it's causing division as well. I think as well, and no one seems to be really talking about the economy on this. I mean, suddenly overnight, you guys may as well have got Bernie Sanders in, and we may as well have got Jeremy Corbyn in over here, because we've all just become socialists, it would seem, overnight, Gary.
Yeah, well, people have called this socialism. It's really Keynesianism, but they essentially, because under socialism, the centralized government, controls the means of production. They don't own the businesses like the industries like communism does. But Keynesianism is what we're experiencing is, and that is just a continual increase of the money supply, which dilutes the value of your money. So you pump $2 trillion of fake money into an economy, and it's like adding water to wine, but selling it as the real deal. And the long-term effects of that, of course, are increased prices. Now, right now, because people are out of jobs, and we're seeing prices relatively stable, although some prices are coming down. Gasoline here is really, really inexpensive. I don't know how to translate that into liters and so forth, but it's very, very cheap here. It's probably fallen, I would guess 30%.
Similar over here to you.
Yeah, and so we're seeing the supply just dry up, and so the prices are dropping. This is economics. This is economics 101. When there isn't demand, the price drops, and that's what we're seeing today. I wish people would understand the nature of economics, and we might have a better economy long term if people understood this is the way things work. And what we have, unfortunately, is government stepping in here and trying to fix this and fix that. And they create one problem, and they come back with 2 or 3 problems, and then they try to fix those problems. And then the government gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, it's
and the people become more and more dependent upon the government.
Absolutely, and it's like the fire. It's like a fireman. They start the fire, and then they arrive with the fire engines to put out the fires that they started. It's like a drowning man swimming deeper to save himself. I mean, the analogies could go on, but I mean, what it has revealed is the fragility of everything, and also the artificiality, and I think the corrupt nature of the economy, because they've just been pumping, inflating this bubble even since 2008, and I mean this thing is surely just going to implode.
Yeah, I mean there's no doubt about that. But Donald Trump did a number of things here in the States that really helped the economy, and that is the decreased regulations, cut the tax rate, made it easier for American companies to come back to the United States and do business. What was happening here in the United States is that the Democrats were pushing, we need to tax corporations more and tax these companies, and the companies, it's not my saying, but I've always said that money is a coward. It's going to go where it feels it's much safer, and so we sent all these businesses overseas. And we've seen what happened with China, that much of our pharmaceutical business is over in China. And we've seen the electronics business.
Yeah, thanks to Larry Summers.
Yeah, I mean it's just, and so we're the fragility of the markets are the nature of the impacting that our governments do to the economy to mess things up for companies. And then a domino effect occurs.
Exactly.
And what Trump did early in his presidency, his first term, was to try to remedy that situation, and that is one of the reasons why the economy took off. Everybody's taxes were lowered, and as a result of that government revenues don't drop; they actually go up. I know it seems incongruous, but that's exactly what happens. What I would like to see in all this is that we get the government out of our lives at the economic level and regulations. It's amazing here in the United States, the trucking business. The government says, "Oh, we need to overturn this particular regulation. We need to overturn that regulation to make this move, so let the trucking industry move more smoothly." And my question is, why did we have those regulations in there in the first place? And it's usually because some lobbying group wants to protect their industry, so they put political pressure on and money to get politicians to vote in order to protect their industry. And as a result of that, it hampers the trucking industry.
Well, we've got it's bad enough over here at the best of times, in terms of the police state. I don't think you guys in America really quite understand what it's like over here in the UK. And because you have a culture which was sort of created, on liberty, and that's gradually and been perniciously eaten away at too. But still, over here, I mean, the government's just always in your face. It's just like parking tickets, and you can't park here, and if you paid this charge, and fine for this, fine for that. And they are really already, we're seeing abuses over here of the police state. I mean, they I don't know, but it's kind of infamous now over here, where there was a clip of a drone shaming a couple out walking their dog in the middle of nowhere.
I saw that.
They took their car out to the middle of nowhere. They had a drone there. We've got hotlines. We've a hotline set up here so you can snitch on people if they're maybe going out. Your neighbor decides you're going out too much.
Hey, look, they're doing that here too. I think one of the mayors of a particular city is, paying people if they snitch on people because they're violating, this distancing regulation. But they've got the walking trails and the bike trails here in our county shut down. They've got barriers up, and I would go out and walk periodically, and I'm never 20 feet from anyone. A lot of this stuff I think is baseless, but I think there are a couple of things operating here. And it's probably the same over there as well. We live in a very political culture, especially here right now, because the Democrats hate Donald Trump. I mean, they literally hate him, and they want to do everything to get rid of him. And they've tried for three years, and they haven't done it. And they see every opportunity to separate him from his voting base. And they're trying to do that here right now. And so they put these roadblocks up and blaming him for this and blaming him for that. And so this whole thing has become political. And so the safe thing for governors to do and mayors to do is to put in these draconian laws to protect their political hide in case something, something goes wrong. I went to a big box store here, Walmart, and now it's like the TSA at our airport. You got to go through these lines and so forth in order to get in, and then you can only go into one entrance because in some places here in the United States, they're blocking off so-called non-essential commodities.
Yeah.
So you can go in and buy food, but you can't go into these other places and buy anything because they're considered non-essential. And I just think that's just plain crazy.
Yeah, there was a clip up here where you saw these police. The imagery as well. You had this stone-faced woman driving the car. Of course, the woman behind the wheel, it just epitomizes our kind of culture in so many ways, and the policeman in the passenger seat. And they were running about harassing people and saying, "Oh, we're just here to educate them." And I said, "What would you know about anything, mate? You've probably never read 2 books in your life. You can barely string a sentence together, and you think you need to be educating people. I mean, it's difficult to swallow, you know."
Yeah, and of course, a lot of people are fearful of all this. Look, we have to admit that this particular virus is very impacting, especially on the elderly. Of course, I'm considered elderly. I'm going to be 70 years old in a couple of days, but underlying a lot of the people who are dying as a result of this are conditions that they've had. Some of them have been
exactly
cancer patients who have their immune systems have been compromised, and so forth. So I understand this is a deadly thing for a lot of people, but there are a number of epicenters around here as to where this is taking place. New York City is a good example of that, and you can understand it. It's more probably like London, very dense.
Yeah, it's the same here. We've got it worse in London than anywhere else because of international travel and the density of the population. Yeah.
And we have 50 states, but West Virginia, for example, I think only has one death as the result of this. And now, if you look at the statistics on flu in general, I mean, it's amazing how many people die as a result of flu every year. I mean, it's just staggering.
500,000.
Yeah. I mean, it's and again, but this is a little different because I think the politics of it have been pushed on it for so long because we have a political party here that just anything President Trump does is something that they want to be able to do. We got Nancy Pelosi, who's the Speaker of the House, that she's setting up a House Select Committee on the coronavirus crisis, and so now what she wants to do, of course, is kind of take this thing over.
God help you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Tell me about it. So you got your strange political foes as well. So you kind of know what that's like.
Yeah, we've got the technocracy into overdrive over here. We had some deputy chief medical officer, whatever her name is, I'd never heard of her 3 weeks ago, telling us the other day that this could go on for 6 months, and maybe, hopefully. And it's just like, who the hell are you? I mean, it's just like, get off my screen. I don't even know who you are, and you're telling me as if you own the country.
Yeah, they've shut down the schools here in Georgia. I just heard today that schools will not reopen until the fall.
Every cloud for the education. You'd probably learn more being kept at home.
Yeah, well, I have nine grandchildren, and I know the 5 of them live very close, just right up the street. And the school has set something up through, I think it's called Google Classroom, where the teachers can actually teach and the curriculum, but we have a very large homeschool movement here in the United States, and so parents have been teaching their kids at home for years. We when our 2 sons were younger, for a few years we taught them at home, and we know lots of people who teach their children at home, and they get a very, very good education. Now, I realize that a lot of parents who both parents work, that's a very hard thing to do. But again, now we're back to, why do both parents work? Oftentimes, they 2 parents have to work in order to pay the taxes that they have. So there's a lot of changes taking place. I think some things are good, and some things are bad because people are getting used to the state telling them what to do, and show your papers, and you can't go here and you can't go there.
Creating the new normal. I've heard that phrase being used, the new normal.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's scary. And I made a comment on Facebook about people asking, what do I think about what's going on here? And I said, well, what we really need to think about is what will take place after this crisis is over, and what the government will implement, because this phrase of never let a crisis go to waste.
Quite.
And that's what the political end of things is trying to do.
Yeah, there was someone else who I forget who said it, but he said there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, you think about it. I mean, I think we still have, it may be gone right now, but I think there were things that were put in place during our Civil War in the mid 19th century that were still operating in our country, and money, of course, money was going to it. That's always the rub right there, is the money that goes to all these things.
But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's a mixed bag, really, because I can obviously, being a Christian, we want to promote the Christian worldview, and we'll get to where God is in this, but immediately you're seeing a threat to globalism and how fragile that is. It reveals the farce that is the EU, because they couldn't care less about Italy and everything else, because everyone's actually recognizing that they're a separate nation, and they've shut their borders. We haven't recognized borders in Europe for a long time now. So there could be some, is it Hegel, the cunning of reason at work here? It could backfire, because there is a huge sort of shakeup going on here in so many areas, Yeah,
of course, you've got some people think is what we need is a global government, and here we got mayors of cities who can't handle anything, and governors of states know how big a job this is, and then all of a sudden to turn it over to some centralized bureaucracy, worldwide centralized bureaucracy. I mean, now you're talking about a police state. Where people are going to have to come in and force you to comply, and they've done that here too. They've actually arrested a minister of a church in Florida because he held a service on Sunday, and yet he followed all the regulations regarding distancing and crowds and so forth. People are supposed to stay so many feet apart and so forth and so on. And so people are, they're a little concerned, about all this, but at the same time, there's the fear factor of they don't want to get sick. They don't want to die, and so they tend to comply with these new regulations that they've implemented.
Yeah, I mean, I think the church is going to have to show some testicular fortitude on this issue, because we have another King, one Jesus, and we are in the West. We've been so blessed, in quotes, although I think a lot of those blessings have become idols and have brought this sort of situation upon us. But we have another King, one Jesus, and this type of stuff has been the norm for Christians historically, persecution, and it is going to separate the men from the boys, I think, because we can't just let the state continuously dictate to the church, because Christians need to congregate.
Oh, absolutely, and but at the same time, technology has in fact made it easier. Our church, my wife and I sit down at 11 o'clock. We get my iPad out, and we can see it live. In fact, I just got every day we get something from our pastors, giving us an update on things, and if anybody needs anything. So the church really is still functioning. But what's interesting about all this is, if you go back through the history, Martin Luther actually wrote on the church's response to plagues, and and if you read it, it's very up to date. We should take every precaution necessary, even fumigating. He goes on this whole list of things. Very rational, thing to do. And as you know, and I'm sure most of your listeners know, I mean, we've had plagues a whole lot more serious than what's going on today. I mean, we've had real plagues where tens of millions of people have died. I mean, Europe especially, you know, the Black Plague, and so people. I mean, people are what we're experiencing today is minor compared to what they were experiencing. And then John Perkins is another person who wrote on this. What is the response to this sort of thing? And you know, it's very modern and up to date about, you know, sometimes the magistrate. It's proper for the magistrate to deal with this because people didn't know how people got sick by, you know, bacterial infections or viruses and so forth, but they did know close quarters, getting close to people, you know, transmitted these particular diseases. And so they weren't stupid. They didn't know how to beat the virus or beat the disease, but they understood how they spread. And the idea of even the word quarantine was coined by those in Venice, and they would ships. They got news that there was some sort of disease that had affected those coming to shore from ships. Those ships had to stay out in the water for 40 days, and many believe it was that 40-day number. It's rather arbitrary, but it was from a biblical, you know, 40 days and 40 nights, Jesus in the wilderness and so forth. So there is a big history behind all of this. What we're experiencing today is not new, except in the fact that we have ways to beat it that our ancestors did not.
Yeah, indeed. And I've tried to avoid it. But, you know, and this is, you know, something that you're well qualified to talk about. This is by many seen as the Great Tribulation and all the rest of it, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, it is. It's people do mention that. The Matthew chapter 24 and Luke 21, Mark 13. A lot of people think that's dealing with the end times, and people thought it during the plague times and Lisbon in 1753 when the earthquake and the tsunami hit Lisbon. I mean, nearly every generation can find something within their generational time span that they say is an indication what we're living in the last days. We published a book a number of years ago called The Day and the Hour, which was a history of all of these examples of people making prognostic prophetic announcements regarding the end based upon wars and rumors of wars and famines and so forth. Now, Matthew doesn't mention pestilence, but Luke mentions pestilence. Both mention famines. But if you study those passages, Jesus is not describing what's going to take place around the world in some distant time. He was describing things that were going to take place to that particular generation. In fact, Matthew chapter 24 and Luke 21, you could escape some of the things mentioned in the Olivet Discourse by simply going to the mountains outside of Judea, which is obviously not something that was worldwide. And there were wars and rumors of wars that were mentioned that took place during that period of time. There was pestilence that took place. I mean, the history books of the era of that area and of that time give mention of all that. In fact, if you go to Acts chapter 11, there was a famine, it says, all over the world. Well, the Greek word there is oikumene, which means over the political boundaries of the Roman Empire. So, but again, sensationalism sells, just like fear sells, sensationalism sells. And we've been hearing this for a very, very long time, that we're living in the last days. I see more and more stuff on Facebook about the Antichrist and the tribulation period and the rapture of the church, and we're the last days of the last days of the last day of the last days, as some Jehovah's Witness presented it. Now, this isn't anything new. People have been predicting the rapture or the end of the world for centuries. using the same Bible verses and the same types of worldly conditions that we're seeing around the world today.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is something I'd be interested in, just apart from our listeners, just personally. Steve Gregg, for example, I came across him and yourself around a similar time when I was looking at the scriptures, thinking, how can this be extrapolated as talking about some future generation, in terms of like going 2,000 years in the future. And so he would consider himself a partial preterist, but I've also heard him, and he doesn't use the word heretic lightly, but he thinks like full preterism is a heresy, and I that's one of the few things I disagree with him probably on, because the same exegesis and the same hermeneutics that you can end up being a partial preterist can also take you to being a full preterist. I mean, there's a guy called, what's his name, Don Preston.
Right.
Now, some of the stuff that he talks about, the corporate collective resurrection, I find a bit disconcerting. But do you think full preterism is a heresy? And I mean, would you consider yourself a full preterist or a partial preterist?
Well, this is the thing that creeds and confessions and so forth, and would consider full preterism to be a heresy. And there are different types of full preterism, as you mentioned. But these guys, they're trying to make an exegetical case. The church really has never sat down and dealt with the eschatology like they've done with other things. With the Westminster Confession of Faith, for example, which is the one that my denomination subscribes to, and there's a Baptist Confession of Faith, which is comparable, but on changes on the issues of church government and the sacrament of baptism. You really couldn't even be a partial preterist. You're based upon that, because a lot of the scripture passages that the Westminster Confession of Faith uses to defend its eschatological position, we would see that as, oh no, that refers to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. The Westminster Confession of Faith said that it was the papacy that was the Antichrist, the man of sin. The papacy was the Antichrist. In fact, there are a lot of people who still believe that today. They consider themselves historicists, and they said, oh well, the reformers believed that the papacy was the Antichrist. The one thing that's right about is that the Antichrist is a religious figure, not a political figure. But I don't believe the papacy is the Antichrist. I mean, I was raised Roman Catholic, and we said the Apostles' Creed. That's where I learned the Apostles' Creed.
So was I.
Was in the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, they believe in the basic assessments of the triune nature of God and other things. I think they're wrong on so many other things, but that's neither here nor there. If you look at John's definition of Antichrist, there were many antichrists, and John said in 1 John chapter 2, verse 18, this was evidence that this was the last hour. Now, the last hour of what? Well, the last hour leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem that Jesus said would take place before their generation passed away. And I believe that the Antichrist that John is describing were apostate Jews who denied that Jesus Christ had come in the flesh, because that is, in fact, the biblical definition of Antichrist.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's when I first studied this stuff, I remember going through it, and when I first read the Bible, I was expecting to see the Antichrist in every other chapter or something, and it was just like, I'm like, where is it? It's only mentioned 4 times, and I think 2 or 3 of them are plural.
Yeah, the only books of the Bible that deal with the Antichrist or with Antichrist is 1 John chapter 2, 1 John chapter 4, and 2 John verse 7. Those are the only places where the term Antichrist is used, and in those places the Antichrist is defined for us: someone who denies the Father and the Son. That is, that there is a an ontological relationship between the Father and the Son, and that would be Jews. That, of course, that would be Muslims today as well. Anybody who denies the triune nature of God would be considered an antichrist. But John had a particular group, and that was Jews living at that particular time, those who denied that Jesus Christ had come in the flesh. And that's the biblical definition of Antichrist. And what has happened is that people, anytime they see a bad guy in the Bible, they take that bad guy and it's like a piece of clay, and they combine it with the other piece of clay. And so the man of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians 2 is this end time Antichrist. The little horn out of Daniel is the Antichrist. Of course, the two beasts in the book of Revelation are the Antichrists, and the Antichrist is the Antichrist. So anytime there's a bad guy in the Bible, they create a composite Antichrist. And what I find interesting is that when I read books of people defending this particular view, they skip over the definition of the biblical definition of Antichrist.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
kind of like, well, here are the passages. Now let me tell you about the Antichrist. And if they actually did exegesis on those passages, they could never come to the conclusion that they did.
Yeah, well, they don't want their listeners or their readers to do too much thinking, do they? They want to come across as authoritative and just sort of skim over that and let me tell you about all this sort of stuff, and don't do any reading yourself. And if you do any reading and you think it disagrees with what we're saying, and which is actually the intuitive way of understanding it, then just ignore that, because you're not smart enough to understand that, you know.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's just like this virus thing. The sensationalism sells. If it bleeds, it leads. As a famous saying about you want to sell newspapers. Whatever is above the fold on the first page of a newspaper is what sells the newspaper. And so the bloodier the headline, the more papers you sell. And it's the same thing with books about prophecy. My books on Bible prophecy, they sell okay, but they don't sell well because they're dealing with prophecy that has already been fulfilled. Man, you write a book about telling people what prophecy is going to be fulfilled, like Hal Lindsay did in the 1970s and sold 27 million copies of The Late Great Planet Earth. Of course, it's like the difference between me telling you that hey, I bought this great stock and made $50,000, and said, well, that's really great, but can you tell me what stock I should buy for me to make $50,000 in the future? Me telling you that I'm writing a book about how I made a fortune, buying and selling stocks, is not going to sell as well as me writing a book telling you how you can make a fortune buying and selling stocks. So Bible prophecy is all about the future and people speculating on it, and then telling people, well, you're not going to go through all this mess. The rapture is going to come and take you out of here.
Yeah, exactly. And I mentioned the Antichrist, expecting to see it everywhere. Well, at least it did make an appearance when I read it, because I'm still looking till this day for the prophecies about Israel being returned to that land in the New Testament. I still haven't found them. As I say, at least the Antichrist did make an appearance in there 4 times. The prophecies about Israel being returned to that land, I haven't found them yet.
Yeah, I go through this with people all the time. I say, show me one verse in the Bible where it says Israel is going to return to the land. And, they don't find one. And they'll go to the Old Testament about Israel returning to the land. I said, well, yeah, the Old Testament does predict that Israel will return to the land. And guess what? After the exile, when they came back, they returned to the land. And guess what they also did? They rebuilt the city of Jerusalem. And you know what else they did? They built the temple, rebuilt the temple. So what you need to do is you need to find a verse. You need to find a verse that says the temple is going to be rebuilt again. And there isn't a verse that says that. And I've been having this debate with this guy on Facebook. And what did he says here? Yeah, I wrote an article about the temple. And he wrote, Gary Demar does not understand biblical eschatology. Believers do not debate Believers do not debate the word. We indoctrinate it in "Thus saith the Lord." And I said, look, I could take that same position. I do take that same position. Thus doesn't say the Lord, because the book of the New Testament doesn't say anything about Israel becoming a nation again. So you can't use Israel being in the land right now as anything to do with prophecy, because the New Testament doesn't set it up as anything to do with Bible prophecy.
The Lord doesn't say thus.
Yeah. Let's see, what else did he go on to say here?
It really is amazing. It is staggering that, I mean, when I first studied the Bible, and I read Matthew 24 a couple of times, just actually reading the thing itself will tell you that this whole dispensationalist thing is just a pile of nonsense. I mean, it's amazing how many people sign on to it. If you'd read the scriptures, you just can't get it.
Oh, I know. I know. I've been doing this since the mid '80s, actually, mid 1980s.
I feel for you.
Well, I do kind of enjoy it. It's kind of, I don't want to say it's a hobby, but it's something that I've gotten pretty good at explaining to people. And I have seen and heard about numerous lives who have been changed as a result of reading my stuff and the stuff of other guys like Ken Gentry and other people. It gave him a completely new perspective on life, because dispensationalism is like a virus.
It's like a religion all of itself.
Yeah, and you are locked up in your own home waiting for a vaccine called the rapture to get you out. I'm going to have to use that. I might have to write a book about that. That sounds like a pretty good title for something.
That sounds pretty profound, yeah. Yeah, it is ridiculous. I was going to say something there, but yeah, it's just amazing how prevalent it is, and how something so obviously unbiblical is so widely held, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it is. It's been you hear something over and over again, and you hear people, famous people making comments about it. That so and so can't be wrong about this. I mean, what about so and so? And I said, well, why is so and so an authority on something, and I'm not an authority on something? Well, because you're not so and so.
Yeah, exactly.
It just gets crazy, and I'm no young kid, coming up. I mean, I've debated this. I've written extensively on this in books and so forth, and sometimes I'll talk to people and say, look, I know your position better than you know your position.
Exactly.
And anyway,
I mean, you did it. I mean, it must be encouraging for you. In times of trial, if I could say that, with me being bombarded by dispensationalists, you did I thought it was a wonderful, just dismantling of this in your interview with Jim Fletcher. I would advise any of you to go and listen to that, because that really does encapsulate the just the insanity of it all. And I thought you were very gracious to him, by the way.
My wife was kind of embarrassed for him, and he, a lot of people, because they grow up with this system and they believe it's an airtight system, and because they hang around with people who believe the same system, they then feel confident to come in and give their perspective on this. Because anybody who holds to a different position is just got to be so wrong, because this position has been vetted, for decades.
And decades is the word, because you can at least count it in decades, because it only came around about 1850 or something with John Nelson Darby.
Yeah. So I mean, it was kind of, and I've encountered a couple of debates like this. I did one a number of years ago up in Illinois, and this is a very nice guy, and he started off. We have each had our opening statements, and he started off telling a story about he had spoken with his son. And he said, I'm going to debate this fellow, Gary Demar, and so forth. And his son said, Dad, tell me how you're going to argue this. And remember, he's telling the audience this, and I'm there as well. And he says, Dad, you're going to get slaughtered. And so what I did is I backed off, and it was a very nice exchange between the two of us, and then I did a debate just in January. I don't know if you saw this debate. It was with Kent Hovind. And Kent Hovind is real big in the creation science movement here in the United States, and he's had some legal problems based on taxes and so forth and so on. But he was a real big pre-trib advocate.
And where did I get that interview or that debate?
It should be somewhere on American Vision's website. So just type in Hovind, Hovind.
Oh, well, I'll watch that after this.
Okay, and so some guy for about a year, an American Vision supporter, said, Gary, you need to debate Kent Hovind because he changed his position from a pre-trib rapture to pre-wrath. And I said, well, I'm not going to call down there and say I want to debate you and all this. But anyway, this guy set it up, and I got an email from them saying, hey, Kent Hovind would be interested in debating you. And I decided
more
to
full
do it. Look, the guy is sharp. He's very, very sharp, very quick. I've watched some of his videos and so forth. I got his book and I went through it, and I really prepared for this debate. And so I knew his position, and he was a King James only guy, and you always had to take that into consideration. And it was close enough that I could drive to. I drove down one day. I did the debate that night, and then I drove back that evening and got back home. So it wasn't as big a deal as it would if I had to fly somewhere and so forth. Well, it was obvious he was not prepared to deal with my arguments. He had already a set of slides that he used elsewhere to push his position. And everything is always built on Daniel 9:24 through 27. I said, where is there an Antichrist mentioned here? He's not. Where's there a gap between the 69th and the 70th weeks? There's not. Where does it say that the Antichrist is going to make a covenant with the Jews and break it? I said, where are those things in this passage? And of course, again, no one comes up with an answer for this. In fact, this guy that was on Facebook, he was telling me that the gap is self-evident. He says the gap between Daniel's 69th and 70th weeks is self-evident. Nothing after Messiah was cut off, crucified, has come to pass, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I wrote, self-evident? I said, that's not exegesis. It's self-evident that there is no gap because no mention of a gap. There's no mention of a gap in the same way that there is no mention of a gap between the 69th and 70th years of the exile.
Exactly.
And I use that.
The irony.
Yeah, I use it all the time because what precipitates the prophecy that's given in Daniel 9 is Daniel goes back to what was the scroll of Jeremiah in Jeremiah chapter 29, where it talks about the captivity being 70 years. And so it starts off with the 70 years. Now, you think these guys would make this connection, 70 years of captivity, 70 weeks of years, no gap between the 69th and the 70th years of the captivity. Why all of a sudden there's there a gap between the 69th and the 70th years of this prophecy? There's no gap between the 70th week of years and the other 62 weeks. And so this is what you're dealing with. It's self-evident.
Yeah, self-evident if you've been completely and utterly brainwashed by dispensational, sensational writings before you go to the scriptures and actually read them. I remember talking to a guy, and he was back and forth with this type of stuff as well. And he said to me, and he said to me in the end, well, what do you think comes after the 69th week then of Daniel? And I said, well, you could try the possibility of the 70th week.
And here in the United States, we have baseball used to be the pastime. Now it's football and probably soon to be soccer. And they always have what's called the 7th inning stretch, which what happens is that the ground crew comes out and re-rakes the field and just puts it all back in shape again and so forth. And that's, of course, to sell commercial time and make money and da-da-da-da. Well, what happens after the 7th inning stretch? Well, the 8th inning happens after this. What happens after? It follows right after it.
Who knew?
In the same night. It's not like, well, we're going to do this sometime in the future. It comes right after it.
Who knew, eh?
I know. It's just, anyway, but... Well,
all right, well, you talked about, it's an important point that would lead, because I want your opinion on this. I think we've been so, in quotes, blessed in the West. We alluded to it earlier about the blessings and the way the church is very provincial in its thinking, and sort of hasn't got a wider historical context of the persecution that the church receives. And I think those blessings that we've had have been turned into idols, and one of them is entertainment, because I find it quite fascinating. There's no more football. There's no more NBA. There's no more Premier League. There's no more boxing. There's no more of any of it.
Oh, I know. It is kind of, kind of interesting to what's happening. But what's happening is that I'm hearing from parents that, hey, this has been great. It's the kids, we're playing games, board games together. Of course, they're doing online schooling and so forth, and working on projects. And because a lot of the parents, aren't going to work either, it means that both parents are home, and they're making something out of it. So
it's got a bit more biblical.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's again, you try to look on the bright, what the bright side, or the silver lining of this, and that is in fact a silver lining, that a lot of families are reconnecting with the family unit.
Yeah, and that's very important. And as I say, I think it just gives people a chance to sit down, think, reevaluate, not put their trust in what is demonstrably, a very fragile system. And I think God wants people to feel that as well. All the idols that we put our trust in, the entertainment, our governments, money, all of it is so fragile.
Oh, it is. I mean, yeah, you're right. It is. That saying, no man knows his time. We really don't know. One day everything was roaring, the economy was just going absolutely great, and then, not too long after that, within a couple of weeks, everything changed, and it's something we've never. Worldwide, we've never really experienced this, this before in recent memory, other than, I guess, world wars are, that's certainly the case as well. But this is something very, very different, and because our governments have increased in power and so forth, it's a little scary as to think what take place, because I do not trust our government.
No way.
Either political party in all this.
Yeah, and I think the most terrifying thing about it is that so many people do. So many people are actually calling for it. They think the governments are great at the minute. Oh, they're giving us a little bit of money, and they've cancelled this debt, and mortgages don't have to be paid, and for 3 months, and we've got renters don't have to pay their rent for three months and stuff. And it's as if they think the government is just like some, cozy, warm father figure. And it's just, to me, it's a complete duping operation.
Yeah, look, I understand that people are desperate in terms of finances, and I've written about what people need to do, that what they should have done. And for a very, very long time, my wife and I, we wanted to have at least a month worth of cash, that if for whatever reason the bank shut down or whatever, we had a month's worth of cash that we could dip into. And the next thing we worked on was developing at least 3 months worth of living expenses. So you have that month of cash, and you got 2 more months you work just so you could live without having a job for 3 months. And I understand that's not, completely possible for people. But it gets down to, what kind of car do you drive? What kind of house do you buy? How often do you go out to eat? All those types of things. And you sit down and, you save 300, let's say you can save $300 a month. That's $3,600 a year. That gets you close to a month's worth of, being able to live without any constraints on anything. And so hopefully people now are looking at this and say they got to prepare for the future. Over here, people went crazy buying toilet paper.
I know, it's weird, isn't it?
We had runs on toilet paper, and I'm thinking, what are they going to think they're going to eat it, or what are they going to do with toilet paper?
I know. I heard someone like this. I forget the term I used, but it was like some sort of psychological phenomena, which is like stocking up on paper, which is representative of the worthlessness of our money, which is just paper.
That's pretty good. That I'll have to remember that. I don't know if it's true or not, but
it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. The money that they don't even print it anymore. They just add some zeros at the end of something and digitize it.
Yeah, some Talmudic banker just creates money out of thin air,
Just think how neat that is that they could do that.
Yeah, Jeremy Corbyn was right. Who knew?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny, but the money that they print is worth right now. Actually, the toilet paper is worth in some cases more than money. Because anyway, it's kind of funny.
I shouldn't laugh, but it's an interesting thing there, what's going on, because I haven't been able to understand the great need for toilet paper. I mean, you'd be better buying cans of tuna,
Yeah, I think maybe bidets are going to be the in thing when people build their homes now, that they put a bidet and they don't need any toilet paper.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any money, so I just have to keep trusting. Well, I lost my job because I work in gardening, and they're a lovely company. They're a small company, and they're growing, and it was a lovely vibe. I loved doing gardening work. And they just had to lay me off. They had to say, listen, we've had too many cancellations, and when this blows over, we'll get you back on board. So, I mean, I've kind of, I'll have to go to the government to get sustained through this. And it's just how it is. But and the church is around me, and I've got a friend of mine who's a good friend. He's got a few quid, and I advised him to buy some gold. So he spent £5,000 on gold.
Wow. Well, right now, we're living in a deflationary economy, so gold and silver prices have dropped, considerably. And I guess if they keep printing the money now, after all this, goes away, because this is kind of like 9/11. I mean, the stock market dropped like crazy, and there was all kinds of crazy things going on, and flights were canceled and so forth, although I don't think we had the unemployment numbers that we have here in the United States. But so, priming the pump with fake money may impact the inflationary rate of that money and increase prices, which we might see gold and silver, go up, because, silver is a industrial metal, and if industry shuts down a bit, you're not going to see a lot of that silver being used in order to make electronic parts and so forth. But
you can actually buy, I think it's gone as far as an ounce of gold can buy as much as 120 ounces of silver. Now, you imagine you do that and you buy 120 ounces of silver with your ounce of gold, and then the ratio drops to, say like 20 to 1 or something like that. I mean, think how much gold you can buy with that silver.
Yeah. I've got a little bit of gold. In fact, the first house we bought, this was back in the late 70s. This is when Jimmy Carter. I don't know how old you are, but I don't know if you remember at least here in the United States in the mid 70s during Jimmy Carter.
I was just born, and I was born in 76.
Well, think about interest rates, mortgage rates were like 15%, and the inflation rate was, it was extremely, extremely high, and so the gold had gone up to this. Now remember, this is back in the 70s, and gold had gone up to $800 an ounce, which today probably would have been, I'm going to guess, maybe 2,500. You'd have to translate this into pounds, but it would have been probably maybe three times that.
No, it went from $35 an ounce in the 70s up to 800.
Yeah, and silver.
I mean, imagine the equivalent today. If you bought that $5,000 that my friend bought gold, I mean, what's that worth? Probably worth about 70 grand or something.
Yeah, silver went up to $50 an ounce. And my father-in-law, my wife and I, we were just newly married, and I was just getting out of seminary, and we were renting, and we wanted to buy a house. And he said, well, now what do you want? Do you want the gold and the silver, or you want the house? And I said, well, I wanted both. But I sold it. This is no exaggeration.
You sold your gold?
I sold my gold, and I sold my silver.
Well, after it went up or before?
It went up. I sold my silver at $50 an ounce, and I sold my gold at $800 an ounce.
Wow, you made some money then.
Those were the days that you could assume a mortgage. You could assume someone else's mortgage if you could pay the equity. And my wife and I were able to buy a house because we had enough money as a result of the gold and the silver to buy the equity in a house that only was an 8.5% mortgage rate, and that was 8.5% was unbelievable.
You made quite a lot of money there then.
Well, the first house we bought, then I sold it to buy another house, and then I sold it to build the house that I'm in right now. So I
gotta wrap up this interview and get on the phone to my friend again and see if I can get a commission.
Yeah, you ought to tell him. He said, yeah, I ought to get at least 10% of whatever.
Yeah, I want 5% at least. Yeah.
I'll have to wait and see what happens with that. So.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I do believe that throughout all of this, God will look after His people in one way or another.
Yeah, he will, but at the same time, Christians need to be responsible and proactive. We can't follow this thing of let go and let God, because we don't do that when we walk across the street with cars coming one way or another. God is in control. We are responsible. God calls us to live out our faith with fear and trembling, and it's our responsibility to do our end of what God calls us to do.
Which is what? What should we do?
Well, on the political side of things, we need to get in there and to try to decrease the power of, in our place here, our national government, and return things to the states. I'll give you an example. The mayor of New Orleans, Louisiana, complained that Donald Trump didn't cancel Mardi Gras. Now, Mardi Gras is a huge thing in the United States, a big festival thing in Louisiana, in New Orleans, and I'm thinking, why did she need the national government to tell her that she should have canceled something that she should have known she should have canceled? And so we have 50 individual states, and our nation was built on this premise that the federal government was a limited government. Our Constitution is a government of enumerated powers, and that state governments had their own powers, irrespective of what powers the federal government had. It's written right into our Constitution, but we've gotten away from that. And so we need to elect politicians who understand these principles. Get the government out of our lives, reduce our taxes, get out of wars, bring our troops home, and get out of paying foreign aid to the countries that hate us, that only prop up their very corrupt governments.
Yeah, how about arresting the bankers in the Federal Reserve?
Oh yeah, the Federal Reserve. It's not even a government entity. It's just really
it's a private bank, and it's got no reserves because it doesn't need reserves. It just prints money. It doesn't print money. It's just like
but governments like that. They oh, it's it's Federal Reserve. We don't have any jurisdiction over it. What do you mean you don't have any jurisdiction over it? You're the government of the United States. There's nothing in the Constitution that says there should be a Federal Reserve.
That is why the Americans and Andrew Jackson fought tooth and nail to keep the central bankers out of America after they were under the cosh of the central banks over here. Yeah. And what was the national debt before the Federal Reserve was clandestinely brought in
that I don't know.
Nothing.
And we still had roads and everything else. It's
27 trillion since the Federal Reserve was brought in.
I know. It's remarkable.
Yeah. But all right, Gary, we'll wrap it up. I've given out your AmericanVision.org and GaryDemar.com. What are you writing most on at the minute? Is it GaryDemar.com or is it American Vision?
I wrote I don't know. I guess the last time I talked with you, I wasn't back at American Vision. I had turned it over to someone else, and it really didn't work out, and the board wanted me back. So last March, I came back to American Vision. So all of my writing takes place on AmericanVision.org. I'll then publish on GaryDemar.com. But go to AmericanVision.org. My 5 articles go up every week, Monday through Friday. And our books, I've got a brand new book coming out. I didn't write it, but I edited it, and it was by Dr. Greg Bonson.
He's a brilliant apologist.
Yes.
He's a bit like is it what's his name, Schaeffer?
Francis Schaeffer.
Francis Schaeffer. He's a great apologist as well.
Yeah. In fact, if anyone is interested in Greg Bonson, Bahnsen, and just go online. And to see if you can find, it's called The Great Debate between Gordon Stein and Greg Bonson. And Greg died in the mid 1990s. He had a congenital heart defect. This was his 3rd open heart surgery. But anyway, we took a number of lectures that he did, and we converted it into a book. And that book is right at the printer as we speak.
Nice.
And that book will be available. Anybody who's interested in apologetics, Greg Bonson was the premier Christian apologist of the 20th century, and this book will demonstrate, help any Christian, defend the faith against all opposition, and that'll be available from American Vision, hopefully in the next, at the end of this month.
Do you think you could send me a signed copy of that and the Wars and Rumors of Wars?
Yeah, I need to. Internationally, I guess I just need to do this. I know you sent me your address before.
Would that cost you? Would that cost you a lot, or?
It won't cost. Since you're out of work, we'll take care of it.
Thank you.
Send me your address again, and
I'll
see what I can.
That would be great. Right, yeah, I'd really appreciate that. All right, Gary. Lovely to speak to you as usual.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.